I am really excited to be able to share some strategies and tools with you guys today, and I really do appreciate you taking some time out of your afternoon to learn more about this. So a brief snapshot of what we're going to cover in today's webinar. We're going to be looking at reading, focus on reading within an MTSS or RTI framework. We will spend just a quick moment. I'm going to try to keep it like 1 to 2 minutes about the MTSS RTI frameworks, because I'm sure you guys have been to plenty of PD about that. But we will get just a little background in that today with a reading focus. And then we'll shift into talking to what I argue is kind of often the missing ingredient in that whole framework and approach to supporting our Tier 2 and Tier 3 students. Then we're going to go through and talk about 5 or 6 strategies to support your students in reading, struggling students in reading. And for every strategy we talk about, I'm going to be showing some tools. Most of the tools are from the DRA3 program, so we will spend some time talking about what that is and going through some examples of some tools that are included within that package. Then I'll say a quick note about ELL students, because they are very important in this Tier 2 and Tier 3 discussion. We'll talk a little bit also about digital capacity and how some of these things can translate into a virtual learning setting. And then we're going to conclude with Q&A. So please, as you have questions, go ahead and enter them into the chat. My lovely helpers will get back to you, but we'll also try to leave some time at the end to answer some of these questions live. So with that, we will go ahead and get started focusing on reading within the MTSS framework. Okay, so unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard of MTSS or RTI before. It's been one of the biggest things in education for the past 2 decades, maybe more. And it comes with a variety of acronyms, MTSS, RTI, PBIS. I'm sure there's many others. But in a nutshell, it involves the understanding that students have varying levels of need. And if we're thinking about reading, students that have minimal reading needs that are doing just fine in that core curriculum, we would like to see most of them in this green area on the triangle. However, there are going to be some students that need some additional support. Those in the middle tier need kind of a moderate amount of support. And then we have a few students that are going to need a higher level of support. Those would be our Tier 3 students. It's a pretty simple idea, right? But in practice, it's actually pretty complicated. So here's just one example of how that triangle kind of translate into a more realistic looking MTSS framework, because there are so many factors that go into supporting the students. So typically when you think of RTI or MTSS, you might picture something like this graphic here, or like a flow chart with a million arrows, things like that. And I will say, there's been a lot of great things that have come from this in terms of helping students and early intervention and all of that. And I love to give credit where credit's due, because I do think reading is actually the area that we have really spent the most time and resources into perfecting this process. But it can be kind of confusing, right? And and I think sometimes I personally feel like even with all of the well-intentioned and very, even necessary components of MTSS, and trust me, I'm a school psychologist, so I am all about percentages, percentiles, aim lines, goal lines, trend lines, all that stuff. But I, for one, also feel like sometimes there's something missing. Sometimes it seems a little bit too impersonal, maybe, or like you have tunnel vision, that you're so hyper-focused on one piece of the puzzle for the student that you're missing the bigger picture. And that's tough for me, because even in all aspects of my life, I'm definitely one of those people that has to see the big picture in order to really dive in and devote my energy in that direction. I have to see that big picture, and then I kind of work my way backwards to figure out how I get there. So you can ask my husband in all areas of my life, this is kind of how I approach things. And so why would reading be any different? So when I'm approaching struggling students in reading, I always have to have that end goal in mind. I'm thinking, what is the point here? Is the point, and what is the point of the intervention time, right? Is it to get the student a gold star? Is it to get them to that green section of the triangle? Is it to have 3 data points above a trend line or a goal line? Is it to read 15 out of 20 words on the list? That stuff is important, and it's a means to an end. But in my mind, in addition to all these SMART goals, I not only want to help create a proficient reader, but I also want to create an enthusiastic reader. Somebody who gets excited about reading. I really want to foster a level of reading that can provide both purpose and enjoyment for the student over the course of their life. And so for students in Tier 2 and Tier 3, I feel like this is particularly important for them because, like all people, things that are difficult for us, sometimes we don't enjoy as much. And so we really do need to focus on this missing ingredient piece, especially for our Tier 2 and Tier 3 students, because it's really easy to get lost in the flowcharts and the shuffle and kind of miss out, and also fostering that kind of inherent emotional connection and commitment and engagement to reading. So we're really going to be approaching these strategies kind of with this in mind today. And as I mentioned, many of the examples we're going to be drawing from are from the DRA. There we go. And the reason I chose to talk about the DRA, and we'll talk about what it is more when I get off my soapbox here talking about the missing ingredient. But, the reason I chose to focus on this program so much is it is very much in line with that whole child as a reader approach. In fact, sentence 1 from page 1 of the DRA3 manual says the #1 goal of any reading program is to help students become proficient, enthusiastic readers who read for a variety of purposes. And I just love that they included enthusiastic in kind of that kickoff sentence. I think it really speaks to how these materials were created, how the package fits together, because it's not only about creating proficient readers, but also enthusiastic readers that really enjoy reading. So what is the DRA? DRA is all about authentic assessment. So teachers are actually going to be listening to students read, and they're going to be having a conversation with their students about the text. The DRA allows them to have this conversation with students in a very standardized fashion. Not only that, it's a research-based program, and we actually have a really good summary of the research in the white paper that you can download from this presentation. So feel free to download that and read it at your leisure. But this is really a structured reading assessment that can be used in grades kindergarten through 8th grade. The DRA is available in English, and it also has a Spanish counterpart called the EDL. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And data is gathered either through paper pencil with hand scoring, or there's also plenty of digital materials that you can use. So the DRA has actually been around for a while, I think over 30 years. It was originally developed in 1986. But the most recent version was released in August of 2019. So if you're familiar with the DRA, I did want to spend just a couple seconds talking about some of the upgrades and changes with the DRA3. So DRA3 is all about linking assessment with intervention. And so this has been increasingly important within the DRA family as it's progressed. DRA2 had lots of these intervention components available as well. But now with the DRA3, it's all kind of linked together and it's available in one cohesive package. So I'm going to be talking a lot about these intervention resources today, obviously, since we're focusing on intervention with Tier 2 and Tier 3 students. Another kind of new component of the DRA3 is what's called the Level Estimator. So as you're getting an idea of your students' independent and instructional reading levels, this level estimator can guide you towards that a little bit more efficiently. It's a quick little mini assessment that you can give before a benchmark that will get you kind of in the ballpark of where the student's instructional and independent reading level is. So this can really save a lot of time, especially for students that are either really far below grade level or really high above grade level. And really one of the most exciting changes about the DRA3 is the expanded benchmark book offering. So we've really put a lot of work into expanding this offering. There's over 100 options, kindergarten through 8th grade. And we're able to offer fiction and nonfiction options at every level. The artwork has been updated, and the books are really meant to keep that assessment process fun and engaging for your students. The comprehension scoring has been updated to facilitate ease and reliability of scoring. It also integrates some of the newer reading research into this as well. Excuse me. The DRA3 also offers a brand new online platform that can be used to facilitate administering this assessment. You can enter the student results in here. Everything's archived. There's lots of reporting options available. It's just a much more modern way to keep track of this data. And finally, with the DRA3, we've really expanded our training and implementation resources. So there's a ton of implementation resources within the online platform. We also have lots of training offerings to fit a variety of districts and budget sizes as well. And finally, the last slide before we get into those strategies and tools, here's a list of all the DRA3 components. So as I mentioned, DRA3 is all about linking assessment to intervention. So we have our benchmark books, obviously, that I just talked about. There's also a progress monitoring component. So there are little brief passages that you can give in between benchmark periods to see how the student is responding to various interventions you might be putting in place. There's also a really cool in-depth word analysis component. This is very, very helpful for students that struggle with word attack skills and decoding. There are 40 different tasks that you can do with these students and corresponding mini lessons to really hone in, isolate these skills, and provide targeted instruction on each of these 40 skills. And then finally, there's DRA Continuum and Focus for Instruction that kind of underlines the whole package that can help really laser focus your instruction, help group students. It really guides teachers towards planning effective and efficient instruction within the classroom setting and the intervention setting. So if you want to see what all of these components look like in the paper kit, there is a link down here at the bottom. You should be able to copy and paste it from the handouts for today, but basically you can also type in DRA3 unboxing. We have a YouTube video of yours truly unboxing a kit so you can see all the different components. All right, so let us get into the strategies and tools that we're going to talk about today. So as I mentioned, there's, I think, maybe 5 different strategies that we're going to talk about today. And for every strategy, we're also going to be talking about a corresponding tool that you could use to implement this strategy in the classroom. So strategy number 1, find the instructional level. So we can all agree that time is very limited. And the way that you're going to make the most out of that intervention time with Tier 2 and Tier 3 students is if you're working with the student during that intervention time at the right level. And we call that the instructional level within the DRA3 framework. So basically for students that struggle spending more time on grade level material, if that's too high for them, is not necessarily going to be getting you the best return on your investment. In fact, you might even see some regression, and not necessarily, in their reading skill. It would be kind of unique to see regression in reading skill, but what I mean is more so in their behavior and their performance. Because if students spend, a long time working at something that is too difficult for them, you're likely to start seeing some behaviors, and you may see some disengagement as well. Similarly, if you're focusing, if you find the independent level of your student and you spend your intervention time at their independent level, well, there's really nowhere for them to grow, right? They're already independent at that level. That's not really going to get you the kind of progress that you want. So we're really trying to find the student's instructional level. There's lots of research to support this. Basically, what we want to do is have an area where there is room for improvement, but not so much room that the student is going to disengage. I do want to be clear, though, that the research also is very clear that we should not abandon giving children the opportunity to read on grade level books. Even if that is frustrational for them, they still should be exposed to this text in maybe whole group instruction and hear the classroom discussions with their grade level peers. And then since you know that this might be at the frustrational level for them, providing them supports such as multiple exposures to the text or pre-teaching vocabulary, building background knowledge, maybe doing some partner reading. This recommendation to focus on instructional level is really talking and honing in on that intervention time with the student. This is where you're going to see the most gains on that, getting them from point A to point B in the data, but you're also going to see the greatest engagement and confidence for students as well. So in terms of a tool, the DRA3, this is a huge strength of the DRA3. It has a very robust way of determining the student's instructional level, and this is done through the benchmark books that come with the kit. So as I mentioned, there's over 100 benchmark books that go across the kindergarten through 8th grade reading levels. There's going to be fiction and nonfiction options at every level. Here's an example of what one of the books looks like. As you can see, there's illustrations, everything's brightly colored. It's really designed to be engaging for students and typically has some an interesting story and interesting information that they enjoy talking about. So how this process works, finding the instructional level, as I mentioned, is really robust because it is looking at a lot of different components of reading skill. So it's not just decoding, it's not just comprehension. There's going to be a lot of different pieces to determining instructional level. So step one in the DRA3 benchmark process is to pick a level to start with. So you're going to choose a benchmark book corresponding to the student's level. So you could use data from previous years if you have an idea about what their instructional level might be. You could also use that Level Estimator tool, which is just a 1-minute quick assessment that you can give to point you in the right direction. But once you determine what level you're going to start with, and you'd sit one-on-one with the students, or this can also be adapted to a virtual learning environment, so one-on-one in a video conference with a student. You'll sit with them in a variety of formats, one-on-one, to listen to them read. And as you do that, you're going to start by recording their oral reading. So we're going to be looking at their accuracy as well as their rate. And what's great about the DRA, well, there's a couple things I want to mention. First of all, the fact that it is an authentic assessment and you actually get the chance to listen to the student read, this tells wonders about what the student may need, especially if they're struggling with that accuracy or expression and prosody when they're reading. You can hear those things and will most automatically recognize that this is an area that they need assistance in. But what's great is the DRA3 makes this very standardized. It gives you a form to record all of this so you can take that data and run with it later. I do want to kind of direct you to the right-hand side of this paper form, which this is all available on the online version as well. But here it's on the right-hand side of this paper form in the gray box. This is what we call the Misq Analysis. So as you're going through and marking errors for the student, you can actually code those errors into categories, which is going to help you as you determine your focus for instruction for this student and designing that intervention going forward. So after you do oral reading fluency, then you'll also have time to do some comprehension and vocabulary focused components as well. So this will look different depending on how old the student is, what grade level they're working at. For the younger students, it's going to be a lot of verbal back and forth where the teacher is going to ask a question, the student answers. It's more conversational. As students get older, this can be done in a written format where you can see some examples here that it's going to ask the student to summarize or answer some comprehension questions. It depends on the story and the level that you're working with, but it's really a thorough way to get an understanding of what information the student was able to take from that and how they're able to kind of do some of those higher level comprehension skills as well. Then after all this data is gathered, you're going to do some analysis. There's a very in-depth rubric that you can go through where you're categorizing their oral reading fluency as well as their comprehension. And this is how you're going to determine if this particular level was instructional, independent, advanced. For helping our Tier 2 and Tier 3 students, we're really going to be looking to identify what the instructional level is for the student. Let me hold off on this one because we're going to talk about that actually in the next strategy. So there is one more component to the benchmark that's optional, but I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about strategy number 2 and why we might want to include this in the benchmark. So strategy number 2 for supporting Tier 2 and Tier 3 readers is getting engaged. So this is really tapping into that missing ingredient I discussed earlier. That we don't just want to have accurate and fluent readers. That is great. And, we want them to be able to answer comprehension questions as well. But, we also need to keep in mind that bigger picture. We want to foster a love of reading with our students, and we want them to be excited about reading and really have this as a source of enjoyment throughout their lives. So we have to take conscious steps to integrate this into the intervention time as well. And this optional component of the benchmark assessment called the Reading Engagement Survey is one very concrete, discrete way to do that. So this is basically a survey that you would work through or the student would work through regarding their reading engagement. So this is an optional component to that benchmark process that I just laid out. Basically, what this is going to do is it is going to ask the student about their reading preferences. So what kinds of topics do they like reading about? What types of stories do they tend to pick up? It's also going to ask them about their reading behaviors. So have they made time for reading on a daily basis, or do they have a set place that they like to do reading? It's also going to ask them to reflect, especially as they get older, to reflect on what their goals are for reading. What do they see as being a goal that they would have for themselves to become a better reader? So this can be very, very insightful, especially if you have a follow-up conversation with the student after this data is collected. Because these components really are that missing ingredient that does need to be integrated into what we're doing during intervention time, but also supporting the student in the classroom and helpful for parents to support the student at home. Okay, strategy number 3, linking assessment to instruction. So the previous 2 strategies were very heavy on the data collection aspect, right? But of course, it's really more important that we make some meaningful use out of all this data that we've collected. And there's actually going to be several tools that fall under this strategy that I'm going to go over. The first one being a direct follow-up to that benchmark assessment piece that I talked about. So after you complete the benchmark assessment, there's going to be a time where you complete a focus for instruction. It's kind of like a survey for that student. If you're using the online platform, once you collect your data, it is going to recommend different areas that you focus on for this student. If you do it in the paper format, it's going to be a little bit more up to the teacher to recognize those pieces. The online really makes it very apparent what areas you'd want to focus on. But for each area that it directs you to, there's typically several strategy or kind of sub skills that you can select for that student. This is an example of an online kind of summary of one student's focus for instruction. So this student needed to focus on their expression and phrasing for oral reading fluency, specifically how to heed punctuation. So these sub skills get very, very specific. And what is so exciting about, especially the online component, is that as you complete these, you'll go through and do it for each student, right? But there is what's called the class skills report, where you can pull kind of the aggregate of this focus for instruction data. So you can see, how many students need to focus on how to heed punctuation. Say there's 5 students, and it will list the 5 students that need to do this. So if you have time for like a 10-minute small group at the end, you can quickly see, who are my 5 students that need to work on this? Okay, let's get back. And there's actually some intervention resources within the kit that I'll talk about later. But it just makes it very, very very easy and efficient to see what area we might need help in and which students need that help. Okay, so tool, that was one tool in that strategy. Another one is really taking a step back and focusing on students that are emerging readers, struggling readers that haven't quite mastered that word attack component. So they're having difficulty with decoding. So if you go through and do that benchmark assessment, or really even if you just hear them reading in the classroom and they're having trouble decoding unknown words, the word analysis component is really a very robust resource that if you have a DRA2 kit, you might actually have access to this and not realize it, or at least the earlier version of it. But basically what it is it's 40 word analysis tasks that really break down the subcomponents of reading. So you'd start with conducting these word analysis tasks. They're just quick little mini assessments. Some of them have, 15 items on them or something like that. And you'll work through that with the student. Then if you find that the student doesn't quite have control over this specific skill, for every task that's available, there's also these corresponding mini lessons. And I actually, let's see, I have one here. So for example, task 1 is working with rhyming words. And so if I went through and did the task and figured out that the student struggled with rhyming words, I can then flip to the mini lesson for rhyming words, and it takes me through, okay, if I was going to do a little mini lesson, what's the objective? What materials do I need? What are the steps to teaching this? Usually there's a scaffolding component to that as well as ways to reinforce that in the classroom. So it's a scripted lesson on 40 of these kind of word attack type of skills. That's really cool. And then for every task, there's also a record of responses. So you could do a running record of kind of little checkups on how they're mastering this skill. So the data can really inform, okay, am I ready to move on to the next task? Do I need to go back and kind of redo this mini lesson in a different way? This is really a clear-cut way of how to link assessment to instruction, and the fact that they're all kind of on that same system is very, very efficient. So this is great, especially for those kids that struggle with those word attack skills. And then the last one kind of under this strategy in terms of linking assessment to intervention, this particular screenshot here is a follow-up to our progress monitoring assessment, which I do believe I'll talk a little bit more about then in a second. But basically, as I mentioned, the progress monitoring are these short little mini passages that you can give in between benchmark assessments. And, they maybe take 3 minutes to read and probably 10 minutes to do the whole thing. And it's going to give you some really great data to help link that assessment to instruction in between benchmark periods. So for every progress monitoring assessment, there's these corresponding if-then statements. So if the student had difficulty with the retelling of character setting and plot, if they had difficulty with that, then these are some strategies that you could use for this student. If they struggled with the vocabulary, multiple meaning words, then these are some strategies that you could do with these students. As you go through the if-then statements, you'll notice several times that it starts to call in different resources that are available in the program. For example, I think it has, it calls upon this graphic organizer. This is something that's available in the kit, or you can download it quickly from the online platform. And how to kind of walk through with the student how to apply this graphic organizer to the passage. And once they master with the passage, then you can start generalizing that to other things they might come across. Okay, so we'll talk more about progress monitoring in a second, but I really like that linking assessment to instruction piece. Strategy number 4, reading routines. And this is actually a strategy that works not just in reading. This is a strategy that works in a lot of different areas. But routines can be helpful for everybody, but particularly for children. Not only do they learn, very well through repetition and drill and that kind of routine, but it really does help with that other side, that missing piece. It helps with their engagement and confidence within the lesson. So when children know what to expect, they often experience less anxiety, which is going to free them up to devote their resources and energy to actually learning and applying the material within the lesson. You may notice if you employ routines in your classroom that you see greater participation within the lesson because children know what's coming. And the more specific the routine is, the better. Because if they know you're going to ask about what are the main characters every time you go through a new passage, then as they're reading, they're going to be looking for that information. They're going to be waiting for you to ask that question because then they can show you what you know, rather than having to generate that much more quickly if there wasn't a routine in place. This little strategy can work across settings, reading, math. As a psychologist, I use this a lot with social skills, small groups. It really is a great thing. So I definitely encourage you to try it. I'm sure you already do it in lots of other areas, but try it during intervention time if you haven't already. The DRA3 builds upon this strategy as well through the use of reading routine cards. So the DRA3 box is going to come with 16 reading routines. I don't know if I have them on me here. Oh, yes, I do. So it comes with 16 different reading routines that you can walk through with your students. Some of them are, again, with the word attack skills like whole word blending and word parts. But there's also some that are routine for how to do summarizing or narrative retelling. So there's a variety of different routines that you can work through with your students. Some of those focus for instruction pieces and the if-then statements are going to call upon these routines to be applied specifically within the DRA context. But the real point of them is to, once you learn these routines, to have the students apply them in science or social studies or different areas of their school day. So these reading materials, I just showed you what came in my kit, but they're also available for download on that online platform. Another kind of routine-based resource that comes in the DRA3 are the graphic organizers. So these are great little tools that can be applied to a lot of different stories. And you'll notice in the routine cards and in some of the if-then statements that it calls upon But this, for example, is the character setting and plot graphic organizers. There's a couple other ones that are used as well. They're simple tools, but the key is having that routine and having students know what they're looking for and knowing what to expect. So as I mentioned, all these resources are available on that DRA3 Online platform. So here's some examples of some of the different types of graphic organizers that are used within the platform. Okay, last strategy here is a very important strategy, and it's celebrate progress. So, as we're thinking about that whole child as a reader, it's very important to acknowledge the time and energy the student is putting into the intervention and celebrating progress whenever we can. So as I mentioned, the DRA3 has a progress monitoring component built in and is aligned with the DRA3 leveling system. So the progress monitoring passages are meant to be given to your struggling readers. So this is not something you do with every student. This is going to be those tier 2 and tier 3 students. It's a quick assessment, and we do recommend giving it at that instructional level. So a nod back to strategy 1. We do want to be working at their instructional level with these. There are actually 95 one-page passages that you would have access to if the entire span of the DRA3 program. These stories are meant to be read typically in under 3 minutes. So they're very brief passages, again, 1 page long. And you're going to be assessing some of the same skills that you would assess during the benchmark, but it's going to be in a much quicker format. And we recommend doing this, about every 2 to 3 weeks to do a little mini check between benchmarks to inform instruction. So here's an example of what one of the passages looks like. As I mentioned, they're pretty brief. In most cases, they should be able to be read in under 3 minutes. You're going to be assessing for rate accuracy on that oral reading fluency component. You're also going to be assessing for comprehension. But whereas the benchmark, your older students would write their responses, for progress monitoring, everything is just done verbally. So it's going to be 3 to 4 kind of comprehension vocab questions per passage to just do a quick mini check on how the student is progressing with their skill. So, and once you get your data, you're going to get real quick on the online thing, it's going to directly point you towards strategies that help in any area that the student is still marked instructional or below. So for example, the retell, if the student was instructional here, these are some things they can do. And on the online platform, it's going to weed out anything that the student can already do and just give you the suggestions that are applicable to that student. So it makes it real quick and easy to see what could I do next. In terms of celebrating progress, it's important to share the results of this assessment with the students and various stakeholders. So parents are typically curious to see this information too. Within the kids, there are several kind of manual ways that you can keep track of progress. And on the DRA3 Online platform, there's also more automated types of ways that you can track progress over time. It will keep that log of your students' progress monitoring data so that it's all in one place. You just log in and kind of see where they were, see what they need to work on, and then conduct that next assessment once it's time. So I did want to do a quick note about English language learners, because they are very, very important in this Tier 2 and Tier 3 discussion. So in terms of supporting English language learners in Tier 2 and Tier 3, just a couple of things to keep in mind, both in working and assessing these students. It's important not to count mispronunciations, especially if it's due to dialect or the language learning process. We don't want to count those as reading errors, okay? We really want to use phrasing and expression as key indicators of comprehension, because students are going to naturally do those phrases and breaks as necessary if they are comprehending what they read. So this is a kind of an under-emphasized area sometimes. Sometimes we'll just go straight to the comprehension score. But phrasing and expression can give you some idea of the comprehension level even before we get to that point. If you have bilingual staff available to you to help, or if you are a bilingual staff, they should be drawn upon whenever possible. I know resources are slim, so that one's kind of difficult. And it's also helpful to assess the student in their first language with the help of the EDL 2+. So this is kind of a counterpart, the Spanish counterpart to the DRA. It's an adaptation or a reconstruction of DRA2. It's not a translation. So this is actual natural Spanish language. It has the progress monitoring components. It has all the same kind of structure as DRA. It has not yet been updated to DRA3, but it falls into, it's kind of a similar structure. And taking kind of both sides, getting both sides of information in both languages can often be helpful in informing instruction and where to go with these students. Okay, and then one more note before we get into open Q&A time. I wanted to spend a moment talking briefly about digital capacity, because this has been one heck of a year. And so we really adapted DRA so it can be used within a virtual learning environment through the use of digital benchmark books. And so everything we've kind of talked about today was these, the benchmark books are brightly colored and fun and engaging. And prior to the pandemic starting, it was only available in a paper kit format. However, there really has been a need to continue to collect this data to inform instruction, even in the light of the pandemic. And so what we have now are digital benchmark books. So all of the benchmark books in DRA2 and DRA3 have been formatted and are now available digitally within a platform that you can get teacher access to. Doing it within this fashion is really going to help maintain the standardization and validity of the assessment. These digital benchmark books can be accessible through any web-enabled device, and they are available as a per teacher license. It's an annual subscription where you have kind of unlimited access during that time to these benchmark books. And so if you want to see kind of how that plays out logistically in a one-to-one kind of video conference assessment with the student, we do have a YouTube video that demonstrates that process. So we do have the link available within the handouts for today. And with that being said, that concludes, all of the information that I had prepared to present today. I do want to I want to end on this kind of final note before we open it up to questions, is, really thinking about it from that whole child as a reader perspective. And that reading is important because if you can read, you can learn anything about everything and everything about anything. That when I read that, I get excited about that. And I want students to kind of have that same feeling as well. So I hope you found the strategies and tools today. I hope you learned something that you can use and take back to your practice or to your work with students. And I do appreciate you taking some time to learn more about it. So are there any questions that pop through, or any trends and questions that I should answer live?
Yeah, we did have one question. Schools that are struggling with funding and wondering, what they could do. There's been a couple of questions that have come in with that. So schools that may have low funding or are struggling with getting approval to use all these amazing resources, what would you recommend for just schools or districts that have minimal funding but would like to take advantage of as much of these resources as possible?
Sure. So, it kind of depends where your school is in terms of if you've used DRA before or not. Typically, when it can be an investment to bring DRA to a district, and a lot of times what we will work with schools on is doing kind of a phased approach, where we might not be able to get a kit for every teacher in the building all in 1 year, but we may be able to do one per grade level or one per interventionist, and that allows it to get in the school, and then we can share amongst ourselves. The digital benchmark books that I referenced earlier are also a great way to kind of expand this capacity within a school. So if we can't get a kit for everybody, but we do have maybe a couple kits in the school, but we can do these benchmark books for quite a bit, the digital benchmark books for quite a bit less. That's another way to kind of stretch your dollar. And of course, anytime you buy a new DRA3 kit, you are going to get free student licenses. 30 student licenses are included with each kit purchase. So for that first year, you'll have unlimited access to the digital DRA3 Online materials.
Thanks, Liz. Just a reminder to everyone that's listening in, if you have additional questions, you can submit them in the chat and I will read them out loud to Liz so that she can answer them. So if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will add them to our session here. Another question had come up about using materials from prior versions of the assessment. So can you speak a little bit to the benefits of using the most current version as opposed to DRA1 or DRA2?
Sure, yeah. So there have been, some pretty significant, number one, changes in reading research, changes in our schools and how we support students. And the DRA3 really has responded well to those changes and made very important improvements. You'll notice that if you can get your hands on some of the benchmark books, you'll notice there's just a newer kind of updated feel to them. Of course, there's lots of new stories as well, but the artwork has been updated. Some of the content has been updated as well. It's just much more modern and consistent with what students are seeing in other areas of their day. And it's really material that they can engage with quite a bit more. So when we're thinking about that whole child as a reader approach, these new materials tend to be something that they can kind of relate to a bit more than the older kind of dated things as well. Not to mention all the things that have been thrown into the DRA3. So with some of the older kits, you might have had to purchase the word analysis separately or progress monitoring separately. That approach is gone. Now we're just making everything available. So you really do get a lot within the new DRA3 kits.
Thanks, Liz. Another couple of questions have come in about information on the website. And so just thinking about webinars, the white paper that you mentioned, or other really useful resources that are on the website, if you could maybe talk a little bit more about the great resources that are out there for customers that are wanting to learn more.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so this webinar is actually part of, I think, a 4-part series. And so anytime we, have a webinar, we will be posting it on the DRA3 product page. And so if you go there now, you can see some of the recorded webinars as well. I think, I guess I don't know exactly what's up there right now, but I know that there's been webinars that really focus in on the progress monitoring component or spend the whole time talking about word analysis. So that is a great place to see, kind of what's new and what new resources are available. If you do have DRA3 as well, there's a lot of resources available within DRA3 Online. So there are some additional videos and training materials in there as well that can support kind of getting the most out of everything you have access to.
Great, thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the benefits of the online platform?
Sure. So one of the biggest benefits, I think, is just having all the information all in one place. The online platform is super easy to use, first of all. So gathering the information is pretty straightforward. It's the paper materials have been transposed into the digital format, so it will automatically time things for you. It will calculate anytime it can. It will calculate instructional or independent level for you. The online platform also allows for recording. So as the student is reading, it can record that student. So if you have to go back later or maybe bring in the reading specialist to hear the student read out loud, you have those recordings available. Similarly, for students that have to write the comprehension questions or their answers to the comprehension questions, those paper artifacts can be uploaded and archived as well into the digital platform. And so when you log in, you have the student's most recent performance, you have their historical performance, you have those that hard kind of copy evidence as well, archived within the system that you can access at any time, share with various stakeholders. The other big thing that I think is attractive about the online platform is it has some really nice, clean, useful reports. So there's a parent report that's super easy to understand. There's visuals that help kind of show, is the student where we expect them to be? Are they below or above? And then in terms of reports for teacher use as well, I mentioned the class skills report. As you're deciding on, okay, what areas of instruction do I want to focus on for this student, it can aggregate that information and show you kind of what are the biggest areas of need for my whole classroom, and then what are some areas that might be appropriate for small group instruction, and which students might need to go in those small groups. All of that data can be just quickly manipulated without having to shuffle through folders or stacks of paper. So, and I'm sure there's more as well, but those are the two big things that pop out at the top of my head.
Thank you, Liz. Another question just came in about the data in the digital DRA3 and if it can be imported into Ames Web Plus.
Let me think. I don't know of any integration between DRA3 and Ames Web Plus. I would be interested to hear more about that, though. That sounds like a good integration. We do have several districts that do use both DRA3 as well as Ames Web Plus. So that brings up an interesting point. But currently we don't have anything available.
Yeah, nothing that really merges them together. I know there's some tools that can be used for rostering that would work with both. A lot of the technology is the same kind of behind the scenes. So a lot of the rostering and exporting is fairly compatible if you're using tools like that, but there's no direct way that I'm aware of to import it directly into Ames Web Plus. But good question. I thought that was worth asking because people want to know about it. The question came in again about the archived webinars. So I'll just encourage you all to go to pearsonassessments.com. And then, in the search, you can put in DRA3. And when you get to that page, there's actually, if you scroll down a little bit, there will be a tab for webinars, and it has a whole bunch of previously recorded webinars that you can view, and as well as any upcoming webinars that we have currently scheduled. There's also some additional resources on a tab called Resources that might help you if you're looking for some other resources that she has mentioned. And I see the website is up on the screen now too, if you want to directly navigate to that page. Just checking to see if we had any other questions that came in while we're kind of talking through all of this. Is there any training that is included with the digital platform for people that purchase it?
Good question. So there are a lot of training resources available within DRA3 Online that you would have access to. However, if you want kind of a more customized type of training that fits the specific goals and makeup of your district, we also have several customizable training options. Typically we offer on-site as well as webinar. Our on-sites are suspended right now until further notice, but we'd be happy to put together a customized webinar for your district. So you could just talk to your assessment consultant kind of about what your training needs are, and they could work out the training plan for you.
Great. And, another question that came in was about the digital benchmark books, and that information is also on our website. It's currently a per teacher license at $14.95. But Liz, do you want to talk a little bit about what those books look like in a digital format? Sure.
I don't have any screenshots that I can show exactly, but so those look very similar to how they would look in real life. So they have been formatted so, that as they have all the illustrations, they're brightly colored. We go through, how to administer this in a standardized format. So you have it kind of blown up so it covers the whole screen for the student. They're beautiful, they're gorgeous. And they can be easily adapted to whatever video conferencing type of solution that you use in your district. So Zoom or whatever, it's just available through the screen share. You'd be able to screen share these to the students.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions that have come in. So thank you so much, Liz. That was very helpful. Appreciate your time today. Anything else you want to add before we close out?
No, just thank you, everybody, for your time and attention this afternoon. If you do have additional questions, I do have my email address on the last slide of the presentation. So if questions have come up as you kind of bring this information back to your districts, I would be happy to field those as they come in. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.